Hey guys, BP Gaming Network. This is part 2 of our tutorial, and if you watched our last video, we spent some time just kind of going over the game modes. Spent a bit of time going over the coach or manager settings and things like that, starting a new game. Today we're gonna dig in deeper into more in-depth game settings. All the settings that I want to show you guys, these are the settings that I use in all my games, especially when I'm starting a 2018 modern save in Out of the Park Baseball. So it's everything I do almost routinely for every save that I start that is not either historical or fictional. In fact, even for some of my historical saves, I actually do the very similar type of settings in all of my games. So the next thing I do is I basically go into the league settings, which can be found under the MLB menu. From the main league settings page, you've got the functions tab, and most of the function that I normally use, usually under editors. So if I want to change a logo for a particular league, and you can change the leagues here. So right now I'm currently at the Major League Baseball. If I want to go into a different league, for example Pacific Coast, and I want to change the logo for the actual league, this is where I go. You make your changes and then you move on. Always remember to hit this drop down and select the league that you want the changes to be affected. So it's very easy to forget, and you start making changes to a different league. So it's important to just keep that in mind. So you can do a few more things here. You can change the league structure, but for the most part I don't recommend doing any of that. You can change the league schedule. Again, there's really no need to do this unless you're playing a fictional game or a historical game where you want to modify the schedules. The standard schedule that comes with this game, even for historical games, tends to have a lot of night games, especially if you're playing historical games going back into the 1920s and 30s. There was really not a lot of night games back then, so most of the games were day games, and so you might, for realism, you might want to edit or adjust the schedule if you're playing a historical game. And the way you do it is, it's very easy. You go into this menu and you basically go into actions and export the schedules file, and you export it, open it using a word editor, or even you can even use your notepad, Microsoft Notepad, if you have that. Make your changes, save it, and then upload it back, or save it into the schedules folder, and then you can import it back into the game. So anyway, won't focus too much on that. That's something that you could do when you're playing fictional or if you're playing historical saves. And here we can also change ballparks. So if, like I mentioned, if you go into the OOTP forums, you will find different mods, and one of the mods is ballpark mods. For OOTP 19, because a lot of people are playing it using the 3D engine, the 3D stadiums that come with the game are fairly decent, pretty good, but they may be lacking in certain things. Like, for example, the advertising may be different, and you may not get different camera angles. So if you guys out there in the modding community have created ballparks that you can incorporate into the game, so I have downloaded a set of ballparks actually that you can find on the forums. Like I said, I will add the links into one of the videos so you guys can find that easily. But this is where you come in before you start your games, or you can change this anytime actually. But you come in here, and if you're changing the 3D ballpark, you want to select the 3D model, and then if you just tab up on your folders, you can go back and find the actual stadium or ballpark folders. And the ones that I downloaded, the ones you see that have a 1_4 or V1_4, all those are modded ballparks. So if I click, for example, we're trying to change Chase Field. So let's go, oops, Chase Field is right here. Let's see, I would go and change it to this particular ballpark. All right, and then if you click on the 3D model tab, you can actually sample or check out the ballpark and see what it looks like. So if you notice, the previous image that was there did not have these types of advertisements like Fox, ESPN. That wasn't there. It kept saying OOTP logos everywhere. Now you've got different logos all along the ballpark, which is kind of cool. You can check out the different camera settings right here. And you know, if you're satisfied, then that's it. Just leave it as is. You're gonna go back to the previous ballpark image. You can certainly do that, but this is where you would normally make those changes. So we'll go ahead and exit back out. And so you can do all this from the league settings under functions. You've got these different functions that you can do here. There's also roster functions, which we're not going to focus on that too much right now. If you ever run into trouble and you want to clear your rosters, this is where you can do it. You can dump your entire rosters. The way you do it is you basically dump it into, you know, if you hit clear, all the rosters on your league will be put into the free agent pool, and then you can go into the free agent section and select all, and then delete all the rosters if you want to ever delete the rosters. And then you can tell the game to recreate a new set of rosters if that's what you want to do. I'm assuming you'll be doing that if you're playing a fictional game or something like that, or if you want to import a custom roster database that you might have. That's one way of doing it. So anyway, we're not going to dwell too much on the functions settings here, because I don't change any of these functions if I'm playing 2018 Modern Save, so I don't bother with this at all. So what I do, the first thing I do is I go into global settings, and from this tab I change a couple things. The first thing, if it's not already checked, I make sure that use complete scouting system is checked. That means that the game is now going to utilize your scouts. The scouts will evaluate players and give you feedback and scouting reports, and then once you enable that, the next thing I do is I leave everything else here as is. The only part that you might want to change if needed would be the scouting accuracy, and I always have it as normal. So there's a lot of debate about this topic. A lot of people like to put the scouting accuracy as low. I don't recommend that. That's just my personal opinion. Again, after doing my own research, there was a time that I used to do that, but I've stopped doing that now. And the reason for that is simple. My logic is that, you know, I know some guys think if you put it in low, then it makes the accuracy of the scouting report to be extremely random, and that way, you know, if your scout looks at a player and tells you this guy is going to be a star, there's a good chance he may end up being a bust. There's a chance he may end up being a star. The degree to which that will mature based on the scouting report into reality is based on this setting here. So if you put it to low, it's gonna be hit and miss, a lot more hit and miss. But I think that in real life, most MLB scouts are fairly good at predicting not necessarily future ability, but rather analyzing a player's current ability and giving us a slight idea of what they think their potential should be. You know, when they discover good players, like for example, a Mike Trout, you know, Shohei Ohtani, they're basically, in most cases, they're right, because Mike Trout did turn out to be pretty good, and he was touted to be a good player even before he joined the major leagues. And so many other players who are stars today, they were known as to be stars before they even joined the league based on scouting reports. Yes, there's still others who initially scout will think that this person will mature to be something decent and then being a bust. That does happen, which is true and it's realistic, which is why I use normal as my setting, because that still gives you a chance to have randomness. It still gives you an opportunity to have if your scout thinks, oh, this kid may not turn out to be a good player, and if you sim your game into the future, you'd be surprised he could turn out to be a good player. So, and that's just the way it is in real life. Scouts cannot control to a certain degree how much effort a player will want to put in the future. You could have an athlete who has amazing ability, but in the future they could just end up being lazy or get into a lot of other off-field issues, things like that, and then not pan out. Can't blame the scouts for that. The scouts will tell you how good a player is just based on their current ability. So I leave that as normal. And then when you go into player rating skills, you have different choices here. And what this is basically when you get a report, it's going to be you'll get a summary report at the same time. For the ratings, they will come with the numbered measurement or rating scale. A lot of scouts in MLB use the 20/80 scale. Not all of them. Some teams or scouts tend to use the 2/8, especially some of the more old school scouts. Some use the 1/5 and some use the 20/80. You can set this to whatever you want. I use the 20/80 because it's a little bit more consistent to what modern day baseball scouts tend to use. And essentially what that is, I'll probably give you guys an example. Let's go in and take a look. Let's take a look at a player. Let's look at Lewis Brinson. So these are the ratings given by your scout. What you see here, 35 for contact. This is current, and then the score on the right is the potential. So the way it works is 20 is way below average, or you can say it's almost a poor level. 30 would be sort of a general minimum standard, if you will, for MLB. And then 40 is just below average, 45 just below average, and then 50 is average. So if you're looking at a guy who's got 35 as a rating for contact, it doesn't look good at the moment, but remember, you got to match that, put that into context. This is a 23-year-old right fielder who still has plenty of time to develop. And so you're looking at maybe in future, he could get up to 45, which is just below average. So 50 being average, 55 is just above average, 60 is above average, 65 is plus average, and 70 is plus average, and then 75 and above is elite level. All right, so 80 being the superior quality type of player. You're not going to see a lot of 80s most of the time. In fact, you're not going to see a lot of 75s either. So a player with a 50 rating tells you that that's about just league average, and for that particular rating. So in this case, you look at this guy's contact, it's well below average at 35. It could get to just below average at 45 in the future. His gap power is just slightly above average at 55, and it's got the potential to get to just above average in the future. So that's how you use that scale. If you change the options here, for example, for the current scale to 1/5, and if you do the same for the future potential scale. So if we go back and take a look at the same player, let's do this. Where is Brinson? See, all of a sudden, the rating system has changed. Now it's using the 1/5, right? So 5 being the elite level and 1 being well below average. I would say 2.5 would be average. So 2 is just below average, 3 is just above average, and so on and so on. So however you want to use the rating scales would be how you would set it for yourself. I personally like to have it as 2080. That's my preferred method, and that's just the way it is. Overall ratings, again, if we go back to the player profile, you can see it's using the start ratings. There's a total of 4 stars, 4 being max and being a pretty good rating, 2 being just middle of the road average, and then anything over 2 is just above that average level when you look at the overall rating. So again, when you're looking at ratings, keep in mind that this is comparing this athlete to all the other athletes that play in right field in the MLB. And right now it's got his rating as 1.5. He has a future potential to get to 3.5. So his potential is really high. This is a good prospect, a guy that you want to keep on your team preferably. That's how that works. So I use the stars. Some people like to have it as nuns, especially guys who use the who play with stats only. They don't like to see the overall ratings at all. If you're new to this game, I recommend that you leave the stars on there. It helps you visually to gauge a player's actual overall ratings. The rest, I don't suggest to change any of that. Leave everything as is. Don't touch any of the coach stuff settings. I leave everything there just as is. And then if you move to the autosave and log settings, a lot of the settings here, I would say, use caution when you're making these changes, because some of them can put a lot of demand on your PC. So if you don't have a huge hard drive with a lot of gigs available, then you want to make sure that you're not keeping too many logs or saving too many logs. So for autosave, I have it as once a year. I leave it that way. Box scores, I have it to be for all major leagues. So the game will save all the box scores for all the major leagues. And generate game recaps, I have it for human leagues. It could generate it for other teams, but it will take up a lot of room if it's trying to save all the game recaps on your PC. So keep that in mind. I leave it as human. Generate WPA graphs, I leave it as human. WPA is the win probability graphs. I don't care for them so much, but I leave them on. It just adds, visually, it just kind of looks nice to have it there. It looks very sabermetric, technical. So I tend to leave it there. Save game logs from, I leave that as human teams. Save replays, I leave that as none. Generate highlights only for human teams. These are your teams. Save 3D movements from all the leagues. I leave that with all leagues. And then when it comes to keep news logs, I don't ask the game to save any news logs. But when it comes to injury logs, I like to have a record of at least multi-year injury logs. So I changed that to save injury logs from the last 2 years. The same for when it comes to transactions. I like to see at least a couple of years of transaction movement. When I look at a player profile, it kind of tells me where they've been and how they've moved around. It helps with immersion. I like it. So I changed that. I always have that to save from the last 2 years. You can make it to save all or even the last 10 years. So it's up to you. Remember, the more you ask of it, the more space you're going to need on your hard drive to really save all these logs. The rest, I don't change anything. No need to touch anything below that. And then we move on to players and face gen. So when you come to this screen, the first area you're going to look at is player injury, fatigue, and suspensions. So I always enable injuries. Again, why play the game? if you're not going to play it as realistic as possible. That's just how I look at it. So I like to see injuries. You'd hate them because when your star player is injured, it sucks. But that's part of modern day sports. That's how baseball is. Players will get injured. Another thing is when players get injured, it gives another player an opportunity to come up. So if your players never get injured, then it becomes difficult to justify sometimes why you need to move a prospect into your major league team. And one of the fun things about playing this game is seeing players develop. It's seeing guys come up through the ranks and eventually make it into the big leagues and become stars, or if not, just the whole process. It's fun. So word of caution here: if you're playing modern day baseball, and by modern day I mean anything from 1990 up to current and future, always use high realistic modern day. Anything from 1989, I would say maybe all the way back to 1950 or 1940s, I use normal OOTP classic. If you're playing in, let's say, the dead ball era, we're talking about the 1900s to the 1920s, I probably would recommend to use the low setting. And if you're playing anything below that, just keep it keep it on low, especially if you go way back into history, like in the 1800s. Try to use the low. The reason for that is that players back in the day used to they were a lot more hardcore, if you will, but the demand for athleticism and the pressure put on players was a little bit different. Back in the day, starting pitchers were expected to pitch an entire game. I'm talking 9 innings, over 100 pitches thrown. As the modern day baseball developed, I don't know what happened, but somehow players got stronger, faster, but they also became very susceptible to injuries. So the relief pitchers came into play. Okay, now if you're playing a game in the 1920s and you leave this as high injury setting, then you're gonna find that you may run into problems with your roster not having enough players, because a lot of your players are gonna get injured. And the teams back then did not keep a lot of players on the roster. It's not like today where you have an entire minor league system with everything from AAA to rookie. They didn't have much of a minor league system. They used to use the reserve roster back then, where it's just a few players that were on reserve. But most of the players were expected to play an entire season. Whether they were injured or not, they used to have to just, suck it up and keep playing. That's not the way it is nowadays. So that's the reason. If you put this to high realistic, you'll notice a lot of players getting injured. But modern day, you have a lot of options to pull from, so you can definitely keep that as is, and you'll be just fine. I also like to have the delayed injury diagnosis as occasionally. Again, it's just to add realism. It's like in real life. Sometimes somebody gets injured and the extent of the injury is not well known until after further evaluation. That's what this is. So you kind of get to know exactly how long they're going to be injured for after a few days, not just right away. Position player fatigue, I always leave that as average. Enable suspension, I always leave that as normal. The rest of the settings, I always leave them as they are. I never change anything here. That's just how I play with my settings there. The next section here is face gen settings. So what I do is, when you start the game, all this will say no fictional pictures. When you change that, it takes away your functions here that you have for player face gen functions. I change that to all players. Create player pictures, I always change that to upon player creation. instead of on demand. I like to have every single player in my league to have a picture. Everybody all the way from rookie to MLB. I like all the players to have some kind of a picture. It just makes it more realistic for me. And visually, it just looks a little bit more appealing that way. Update and generate player pictures. I leave that to on status update. What that does is, as players age or when players mood changes, the game will adjust their face gen. So you'll see a guy who looks a bit more pissed off if he doesn't get the contract he wants or if he gets demoted, versus a player who receives a good contract or is playing really well. They'll have a smile. And also with aging, you'll see facial characteristics change over time as players age. So I leave the game to update those as the status of that player changes. Coach pictures, I do the same thing. When you start the game, it will say no fictional. When you change that to no fictional, you lose the functions here for face gen. So I always change that to have all pictures available. And face gen color, I always have that as normal, and I don't keep any background pictures on my face gen. Now, when you enable all that, make sure everything here is checked. And then when you come down to the functions, there's usually mostly only 2 functions you're going to use most of the time. If you're starting a new game, and I'll show you guys real quick here. If we go into the team page, I've already done this for this league, but if you start a new game, you'll notice a lot of your rookie players will not have any pictures on them. All right, so I've already created pictures for this league, but if you're starting a new game, you'll notice only the major league players and maybe AAA players and only key players will have face gen or pictures. I like to have pictures for all my players, like I said, and so as a result, I come in here and you hit update and generate all pictures. So what's going to do is the game is going to generate all the remaining pictures that were not there when you started this game, and then it's going to do any updates that are needed. If needed, you can do the force update and generate all pictures. What force update does is it will force the game to update every picture based on its mood, based on its aging characteristics. That can take a little bit longer to generate. So all I suggest is just use the update and generate all pictures. The rest, you don't need to use them. You never have to use these unless you have a corrupted roster or images or something, and you've deleted all your rosters and now you want to generate new pictures for whatever reason, but you rarely ever need to use that. Same goes with coach face gen functions. Always just use the update and generate all coach pictures. That's all you need to really use ever. The rest of the functions, I never touch them. I don't think I've ever touched them unless I was playing in my fictional league. So again, if needed, we'll create a different video for that and show you guys the settings that I use for fictional games. But for a straight up MLB modern day game, you never need to change or touch any of this stuff here. So that's a summary when it comes to players and face gen tab. So then we move on to AI settings. Another area where if you go into the forums, you'll see a lot of people talk about this section. So the first thing, you got your trading and AI settings. You want to set your trading difficulty. I always have that as average. The reason for that is you want to have a bit of a realistic trading setting. A lot of people tend to change this to hard. If you put it to hard, the AI will demand a lot more for everything that they give you. It's good in a way because it stops the AI from making stupid decisions. You know, for example, trading Mike Trout for a 47-year-old overpaid, useless, ball player. But the developers have really made a great effort to fine-tune the engine, the game engine, to the point where the trading AI logic is pretty cool. By the time you're playing OOTP 19, you don't really need that hard setting, in my opinion. Average is perfect. The reason I have average is that even in real life MLB, sometimes you'll see trades where you're like, whoa, why did they give up that player? What was the deal there? You don't want to have a situation where it's impossible to make trades. You want to have a situation where it's realistic to make trades. If you put a player out there, you get some kind of offers. And even using the average setting, the AI is not stupid. It's not going to make stupid decisions the way it probably used to, like back in the day. So I trust the average setting. It works well for me. It enables the trading market to be a lot more liquid, so players can move around easily. Not too easy, but certainly it's not as uptight as if you keep that as hard. If you leave it as hard, you'll find that a lot of decisions that you make, the AI is not a human, so it's still gonna cost you a lot more just to make a trade, which sometimes is unrealistic. Trading preference, I leave that as neutral. Some people like to have it as heavily favor prospects. I used to do that and then I stopped. I like the neutral option because I like to know, I like a situation where anything goes. AI again has been developed over time by the developers to the logic is pretty evolved, I would say. So you don't need to change this into any one of the biases, if you will. I leave that as neutral. But if at any point you find good reason or evidence to use a different setting, feel free. This is just my opinion. I like neutral. And then you've got your player evaluation AI settings. This is another hotly debated topic. A lot of people like to change this around. What this does basically is this is what tells the AI on how to value players. So for example, when the AI is looking at a particular player, using the settings that you're looking at right now, most of the weight is on ratings. So that means the AI is going to look for a player with higher ratings first, and then it's going to look for a player with decent stats in the current year, and then it's going to look for a player with just decent stats in the previous year, and then at the very least it's going to consider the last 2 years of a player's stats. A lot of people tend to think no, in real life we tend to look at a player's stats to determine the player's worthy or the player's ability. So if a player is playing really well this year, we tend to say that's a good player and his marketability goes up. That is true to a degree. It's not 100% foolproof. It is true just to a degree. So if somebody tells you Mike Trout is struggling this year, you know very well Mike Trout is still Mike Trout. You know his abilities. You know he's still young. You know he has power. He's good at making contact, but he's just having a bad year. You're not going to overlook Mike Trout knowing that it is still Mike Trout just because he's having a bad year or a bad few months. You're still going to try and get Mike Trout when you can, right? So using that logic, I tend to leave things as the way the developers have left it. 65% weight against ratings is good. That means good players will be known as good players. If they end up not performing to the expectations, that's just the way it is sometimes. There's a lot of players in different sports where everybody knows that they're good, but maybe for whatever reason they're not playing to the capability they should. So you want the AI to still kind of apply that same logic when it's evaluating a player. You want the AI to respect good players as it should. If their overall rating is high, that means they're still good players. There's a reason why their rating is that way. If their scouting report or whatever is wrong, then that's still part of life. That's realistic. Sometimes the scouts don't get it right? So I tend to leave my settings here as is, just the way it came with the game. 65 for ratings, 20 for current year stats, 10 for previous year stats, and then 5% for 2 years ago stats. When it comes to lineup selection, I use the traditional method. Some people like to use the sabermetric. I'll explain the difference. In fact, I'll show you guys the visually how you set up an MLB lineup using the traditional way. So this here is the lineup. Talking about the first 9 players that you're looking at here. So as leadoff, Cameron Maybin. Traditionally, you want to look. You want your leadoff batter to be a guy who's very fast, who can steal bases, who's very athletic. It also helps if he can make contact, but you're going to weigh his ability to steal bases and his speed a little bit more than his ability to hit. You're not going to care too much about his power. You're going to look mostly at his ability to run the bases, to steal bases, and his speed. And yes, it does help for him to have a little bit of a higher on-base percentage together with those abilities. That's your leadoff guy, right? Because if he does get on base, that means he has the ability he has a good eye. He can draw walks. And once he gets on base, he can cause a lot of commotion by trying to steal bases. He can get the pitcher rattled because he's now going to try and steal bases. That forces the pitcher to throw bad pitches and so on and so on. There's a lot of traditional logic and reasoning behind that. Your number 2 hitter on the lineup is going to be a guy who's now, I would say you're probably maybe second best hitter. At the very least, a guy who's very good at bunting. Traditionally, a lot of teams used to bunt. So you're going to need a guy who can definitely hit for contact. You don't care so much about power at this stage. You want a guy who can move your leadoff guy if he gets on base, who can move him along the base running, the bases. You need a guy who's got a good eye so that he can work the count in the favor to hopefully create a situation where your leadoff guy can steal the base. You're still going to need a guy who's also a bit athletic. He's got good base running ability. Doesn't need to be as fast as the leadoff, but at least some speed. He doesn't need to be the slowest guy in your team either. So what am I saying? You need an overall decent batter to play in that second spot. Okay. Your third batter, also known as the number 3 hole, is going to be your best player. This is the guy who has pretty much everything going for him. He's going to need to have very high contact ability. That's the ability to make contact with the bat. He's going to need to have good discipline. He's going to need to be able to hit for gap power at the very least, if not a bit of a power behind him. This is the guy that you're going to trust to really drive in some runs for your team. This is typically modern day baseball. This is sort of your best player in that number 3 spot. Okay. The number 4 spot, also known as the cleanup hitter. This is your most powerful hitter, will occupy the 4th spot. This is a guy with a lot of home run power potential. Rating currently. He doesn't need to be the fastest guy. He doesn't need to be super athletic. He just needs to have power. He should be able to drive in some runs if the first 3 guys have managed to get on base. Right? That's your cleanup hitter. The number 5th hitter should also have quite a bit of power. Not as powerful as the number 4 cleanup hitter, but he should have a little bit of power. You always want to stack up your power back to back, right? So if your number 4 hitter is your most powerful guy, the next most powerful player needs to occupy the number 5th spot. All right. That's how you're going to look at it. You don't care so much about his athleticism at this point. Speed and base stealing is not crucial. What's crucial is contact, discipline, and power. Your number 6th batter on the lineup should basically now be, I would say, your top 4, if not your top 5 hitter. There's really not a lot of criteria for that spot other than just the next best hitter after your first 5 batters have been selected on the lineup. So it could be most likely your number 4th best hitter on the team. The number 7th spot and the number 8th spot, there's not a lot of criteria for them. They just need to be in ranking order. Your 7th best hitter or your 6th best hitter, and those two will occupy either the 7th and 8th. The 9th spot will be reserved for your pitcher. So if you're playing in the non-DH league, this is a league that doesn't use the DH rule, where pitchers come to bat. That's the number 9 spot is going to be for your pitcher. So you will notice in most MLB teams, when a player is struggling, they get demoted from the top areas to the bottom areas. So you'll see guys who are struggling, they will take up the number 7th or 8th spot. The reason for that is you want your best players occupying the top areas, the top spots, and that's because they will come up to bat or get more plate appearances more often than the guys at the bottom. That's the logic. And also, if they're lined up correctly, then you have a threat at the top to try and drive in runs before you get to the bottom end of your lineup. So that's the logic, and that's kind of how traditional lineup selection works. Sabermetric, just like it says here, it considers a lot of splits. Sabermetrics is the use of advanced stats. Advanced stats look at a lot of criteria when it comes to evaluating a player. We're talking about things like on-base plus slugging, so OPS. You're going to see ERA plus. You will see a lot more advanced statistics when it comes to evaluating a player. And things like WAR, right? That's your wins above replacement, and a whole lot more other. Every day they come up with new advanced stats to consider and look at. Also, sabermetrics, when you're using that as a way of selecting a lineup, will consider matchups. So in baseball, statistics do show that if a left-handed batter is facing a right-handed pitcher, the batter has an advantage. If a right-handed batter is facing a left-handed pitcher, the batter has an advantage. So if you're setting up your lineup using sabermetrics, the game will try to do a lot of matchups based on the handedness of the pitcher against the batter. So that's the other thing to consider. Now, I leave mine as traditional because I feel like even though a lot of teams today use a lot of sabermetrics when it comes to evaluating players, when it comes to lineup selection to this day, I find that a lot of teams, not all, a lot of teams are still using the traditional way of setting up a lineup. Some are starting to experiment with sabermetric. So I don't think the game is there, and I don't think I want to use that method, or at least have the AI using that method of selecting lineups. So I mean, maybe 5 years from now, that will be the most common way of selecting a lineup, and by then we will change and start using that. But for now, I feel traditional makes the most sense, so I use that as my way of selecting the lineup. Okay, so the next tab is Almanac. I don't change anything here. I don't select anything. I leave it as is. Online league. I don't play online leagues, so I leave everything untouched. I don't change anything there. Database. Never touch anything on the database unless you're a pro and know exactly what you're doing. I will never recommend anybody to come in here if you don't need to be in here. And then we're back to the league settings functions. We'll check out another tab here under league settings and league and team. If you're playing Modern Day MLB using the new game function where you're not playing historical or fictional, there is no need to come in here and change anything. This is already pre-formatted and set up by the developers, and it comes already set up for your game. This is the structure of the current MLB league. It mirrors the real life, and it's perfect and good just the way it is. Next tab is rules. Again, if for your MLB league, there is no need to change anything here. All the common rules that are currently used in MLB in real life are already pre-selected for you. You don't need to add anything. There is only one thing I tend to change when I'm in here for the MLB league, which is I click on this. Usually it's unchecked. It's under trading of recently traded drafted players. I tend to change this and allow trading of injured players who have injuries that last less than 7 days or up to 7 days. My logic for that is that if you're making a trade even in real life and you have a player who's just got a minor injury, it's just a twisted ankle, it's supposed to heal in 3 days, are you telling me you're not going to consider that player in a trade? Of course you will. It's not a long-lasting injury. It doesn't have any long-term detriment to the player or to your team. So it's not a raw deal if you're trying to close a deal and one of the players is slightly injured on a very minor injury. So I select that so that in the game, if I'm making trades, I want to be able to consider players that are slightly injured, because if the guy's just out for 3 days, I'll take him. He can rest for those 3 days and he can be playing for us in 3 or 4 days. So that's the only thing I changed. So I check that. The rest of the stuff, I leave it as is. Don't try to change anything. It's like I said, it's already pre-designed for accuracy and for realism when you compare it to current real-life MLB. There are a few things that you will need to change while you're in here, though. So pay attention. The league comes already included with your minor league system. So this is the team homepage. To your right here, you could see your entire minor league system. So the Miami Marlins, they have a AAA team that plays in the Pacific Coast League. They have a AA team that plays in the Southern League. They have a single A. They have an advanced A, which is the A plus team that plays in the Florida State League. They have a single A team that is that plays in the South Atlantic League. They have a short season or lower A team, single A team that plays in the New York Penn League, and then they have 2 rookie leagues: the Gulf Coast Rookie and Dominican Rookie. Now, when you start a new game, the active roster size limit is usually set to no limit for all your minor leagues, but that's not correct. That is not realistic, and it will take away from the realism of playing a modern day MLB save. All right, so I'm going to show you guys what you change. So on the right here, you select the league. You're gonna select the first AAA league, which is the International League, and you're gonna change the active roster size to 25. When you start the game, it's gonna say no limit. You don't want to have no limit. That means you can have as many players as you want in your AAA team, but that's not true in realistic. Modern day and realistic AAA teams have a roster size limit of 25 players. So you're going to change that to 25. That's the only thing you're going to change here. And you're going to go back and select the next league, which is the Pacific Coast. Change that to 25 players. You're going to do that for all your teams. Now, pay attention. All your teams in AAA, AA, Advanced A or A+, Single A, which is regular A, all the way to your regular A. Okay? So if you see here, the regular A league, the last regular A league here is the South Atlantic League. All the way up to the South Atlantic leagues, all the leagues will have an active roster size limit of 25 players. When you go to your lower A's, which is your A minus, the first league is the New York Penn League. You're going to change that to 35 players. All right? You're going to go to the next league, which is also another A minus or lower A, plays a short season, and that's your Northwest League. You're going to change that league to have 35 players. There's only 2 lower A leagues, the New York Penn League and the Northwest League. Everything from that, the rest will be rookie leagues. You leave those as no limit. All your rookie leagues, so we're talking Appalachian League, Pioneer League, Arizona Rookie League, Gulf Coast Rookie, and the Dominican Rookie League, are all going to have a no limit to their roster size. So anything that says R, there's no limit. All right. So guys, keep in mind that's the only thing that you're gonna need to change under the rules tab. Once you're done, make sure you change this back to Major League Baseball ML so that you can advance to the next settings. All right. Once you've changed all your minor leagues to make sure they have the correct roster size limit. So the next tab, we go into financials for the Major League, and you don't change anything at all. Again, this is for your modern day save. Anything from 2018 current modern day, don't make any changes. If you go under options, there's a couple things we're going to change here. The first thing, I always allow the game to enable automatic evolution of the league. You can uncheck this if you don't want your league to evolve at all in the future, or you can check it. And when you check it, this is how it comes when you start a new save. It's these selections are already selected for you. I go in here and unselect everything. I don't want my league to expand. I don't want any teams to relocate. I don't want any teams to change their nickname. I don't want the schedule length to change in the future. I don't want the active roster size to change in the future. I don't want the 40-man roster size to change. I don't want the DL length to change. I don't want my designated hitter rule to change, and I don't want my free agent minimum service to change. The only thing that I'm okay with changing as the game evolves is having more or less offense and having more or less pitching. That is true to life. If you follow Major League Baseball, if you read up about the history of the game, you will notice that over the years, the game has shifted on the pendulum from one end to the other. There was an era where there was a lot more, the teams were, overall, all the teams were producing a lot of offense, a lot of home runs, a lot of bases stolen, a lot of hits and things like that. And then there were eras, there were times during that era, or during a different era, where there was less offense. So that dynamic aspect of the game is realistic. It has been in history, and you might want that to continue into the future if you're going to play a lot of seasons into the future. The same can be said of pitching. If you go back to the dead ball era, that was the pitching era. That was the time when a lot of pitchers used to pitch an entire game. Most pitchers used to have very low ERAs. It was very difficult for batters to hit home runs or even get hits. We call this the spitball era, when pitchers used to contour the baseball, spit on it, do all kinds of things, put spikes on it, and the ball used to take a lot of weird movements. So there was a lot of advantage given to pitchers. The mound size was different. The distance from the mound to the plate was also different, and so there was a lot more pitching back then. And then there was a time when that changed, when the rules were changed, the mound got increased, and it got pushed a little bit further back, and all of a sudden, and you could no longer spit on the ball, and all of a sudden it became a hitter's universe, and there was a lot more offense. So things like that have evolved and changed from time to time. Again, like I said, they do swing from one side of the pendulum to the other. So that's the only thing that I leave checked when it comes to dynamic evolution. Everything else I uncheck. A couple more things you're going to want to change while you're here is the awards. When you start the game, there's going to be a weird name here. When you come to the offense by position award name, it's going to say the Silver Stick Award. You're going to want to change that to the Silver Slugger Award. Okay. The next award you're going to want to change is the one below it, the defense award name. It's going to say the Great Glove Award. It's supposed to be the Gold Glove Award. Now, Those names are there intentionally. The developers did not do a mistake. It's just that they do not have a license from MLB to use those award names. Okay, I believe it's because the MLB tends to sign contracts with different companies or whatever have you to sponsor those awards, and out of the park development team did not get a license to use those two award names. But once you own the game for your own personal use, you can customize it as you want, and it is legal. So you can change those two awards. The first one will say Silver Slugger Award, and you can change the next one to the Gold Glove Award. That's all you do under options. If you go to the Players tab, do not change anything here. Move along. When you go to historical, don't change anything. And when you go to stats and AI, do not change anything when you come to all these tabs. So in summary, that's all I do when it comes to settings. These are my core settings for the game. I have to change all those things every time I start a modern save without fail. I use those settings. I've been using them for now almost 3 years straight. And I play a lot of different games. I started different saves from time to time, and I use the exact same settings. They work well for me. I've never had issues. I play a very realistic game. I don't cheat the game, like I said. I like to just have the game play out as it would without having to really control the game in any way. I always like to play with the most realistic settings that I can find. I've researched the use of most of my settings, and there's logic behind why I choose the settings that I choose to use. So I hope you found that segment informative and helpful. On the next video, I will show you guys a few more. I won't call them settings, but I will call them baseball concepts. There's a few things that I tweak around using realistic baseball concepts, and especially if you're new to baseball and to out of the park baseball, the game, it's things that you want to know, which will help you to kind of get started with the game. It may feel overwhelming at first, but like I said, once you start playing the game, once you trust yourself, it's okay to screw up. You can always, make sure you back up your game. I should have mentioned that in the beginning. I always back up my game all the time. To do that, you go into File, Backups, and I hit back up the current game. I do that frequent. That way, if I do end up screwing up, I can always revert back to my last backup. All right, guys, appreciate you watching. Like I said, there probably will be another video which will focus more on just baseball concepts that apply in the game, and how to play the game, how to go from day one into the next few games into your season, and go from there. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask, drop a comment. Appreciate you guys watching. Thank you so much.